Welcome to the Landcare in Action stream of the National Landcare Virtual Conference for 2021. My name is Andrew Scott, Bush Care Officer for North Sydney Council. This session is titled Building Community Capacity. If you have any questions, can you please start entering them in the text box during the presentation, as there will be limited amount of time at the end to answer them. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Ingrid Seeler. Take it away, Ingrid.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Whadjuk Noongar people on whose land I'm presenting from today, and to recognise their elders past and present. My presentation is about the work that we've done around building community capacity, and I'll be using examples of the amount of time and effort that volunteers put in to look after our natural heritage. The community capacity work that we've done started in about 2013, formerly through the National Landcare program being funded by the Australian government. And most recently, we've received funding through the West Australian State NRM office for a new program to assess community capacity and to work with environmental volunteers. So with our program, what we are looking at doing is assisting community volunteers to improve their outcomes in natural resource management. We work with local government to help and direct and guide their contributions for volunteers in working in this environmental area. And overall, what we're trying to do is to facilitate better outcomes in natural resource management across the Perth region. And the images throughout the presentation just show the work that our volunteers do. So this next slide is just an overview of our community engagement program at Perth NRM. And what we look to do is support community capacity building projects that overall assist environmental groups and individuals to take an active role in caring for the environment. We look very much at increasing their knowledge and skills and to advocate for our natural resources. Our projects include the ones that I'm talking about, which is the community capacity assessments, a 6-season walk program that we run with Aboriginal elders, which includes walks and cultural talks. We also support a corporate volunteering and student volunteering program. And this image here is of Bankwest volunteers helping the Armidale Gosnells Landcare group as part of that corporate volunteering. We do events around knowledge and information transfer, and then provide general information through our newsletters and social media. This slide here just shows the extent of, I suppose, research and reports that have been undertaken and that we're using as part of our next round of community capacity assessment. So we've got the ones all the way from back in 2013 about the benefits of Landcare, right through to the wellbeing report that a number of presentations are on. And the WA Landcare Network is also undertaking a survey at the moment. And we're hoping or aiming to use these reports and their results to inform the work that we do in our community capacity assessment of the environmental groups in the Perth region, and also use it to help formulate the way we present the results, because what we're really trying to do is more effectively advocate for environmental volunteers. So why do we want to understand community capacity? Well, for us, it's really important to be able to support the groups and the significant work that they do across our natural areas in Perth. So we want to understand how the groups are organised. Are they formal, incorporated bodies? Are they informal groups of like-minded people? How do they receive the funding and how are they supported to do their on-ground work? What are their partnerships like with the land managers, with other NGOs and between the groups? How much time do they actually spend undertaking on-ground and administrative tasks? and what sort of motivations do the volunteers possess? So what we did to understand the groups and the work that they do is in 2013, a former colleague of mine developed a framework around the capitals of human capital, social, financial, and organisational capital, and formulated the first survey that was undertaken in February 2014, which consisted of a number of quantitative and qualitative questions. And we can see from this slide here that the 5 surveys that we did, there's over 500 responses that have been received. And what we're looking to do with these results is to understand how we can better assist the groups, what they need in terms of the quality of information or support around organisational capital and financial capital, but also the social skills. One of the things I just wanted to point out was that between 2016 and 2017, we changed the survey a little bit to ask the first series of questions to everyone that participated, but then the questions that were around the organisation and its finances, we asked for one representative from each group to provide us with the information so that it was of higher quality. So we start to see in this slide how many groups are involved in environmental volunteering across the Perth region, and the extent of the work that they do from the top of our region up around Yanchep, down to the southernmost borders around Rockingham, over to the west on Rottnest Island, and then up in the east along the Darling Scarp of Chidlow and Gidgegannup, where there's often farming properties involved in there as well. So of the 110 people that participated in 2017, we found that 65% of the respondents had a leadership role. So they were a convener, treasurer, secretary, that sort of thing. 62% of the respondents were over 60 years old, and that's probably something that's come through in the other surveys and presentations as well. Most people work in natural areas that are fairly close to their home, but there were a number of people that were willing to go far and wide, even nationally and internationally, to do volunteering. We had a really good representation from across our local government areas, with 30 of the 32 LGAs represented, and there were 58 different natural areas that groups reported on. We had a number of people who work in partnership with the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions in our parks and reserves, and together the volunteers work on areas that range in size from about 1 hectare up to about 2,600 hectares. So what actually motivates people to volunteer? And so this graph here shows us that for many of them, it's about fulfilling their desire to protect and preserve the environment. They want to leave a legacy for future generations, but there's also the social capital aspect of things. So friendship and being part of something, and increasing their self-esteem. So this next slide, what we wanted to do to understand how the groups function and how well they can work together is to understand, in terms of the motivation and their attitudes towards natural resource management, how cohesive are those groups? And what we found was that in terms of believing and understanding what natural resource management is about, there was a high level of cohesiveness around that. They also mostly agree on the priorities for their area and then on how those activities should be conducted. So the groups are generally fairly well organised, fairly close-knit, and have a good sense of direction and working together. So in terms of, I suppose, really understanding the significance that the volunteers provide to the Perth region, we collected information about the amount of time that they spend on their on-ground activities. And I'm just going to read you some information about this now. So what we did was we asked them to report on the time spent on the on-ground activities, and then in the next slide, the support that they give. And what we found was that in 2017, they reported a total of 51,180 hours. And at $30 an hour, we've estimated that this is worth about $1.5 million. As you can see from the graph, most of their time was spent on weed identification and removal and revegetation activities, each over 6,000 and close to 7,000 hours. They also did quite a lot of work around site monitoring, the supervision of volunteers, and the removal of rubbish from our sites, which is becoming a greater problem in Western Australia, with between 4,000 and 5,000 hours undertaking these activities. And what we found, interestingly, in 2017 was that for the first time, community education clocked up over 4,000 hours, and it sort of indicates the changing roles of some of these groups as well, in terms of providing education, knowledge to the wider community about why our nature is important. So overall, we can see that a significant amount of time is spent on addressing threats to the natural values of our managed areas, with over 15,700 hours attributed to the identification and the removal of pest plants, animals, and pest plant species. The next slide shows you how much time the groups need to put in to support the on-ground work that they do. And what we found out was there was over 38,000 hours that were contributed to actions to sustain on-ground volunteering. And again, based on $30 an hour, we calculated that this is worth over $1.146 million. And also that there's a ratio of about 1 hour of on-ground work, 1 hour of administrative work or supporting the groups to every 3 hours of on-ground work. And this is an increase over previous years. From the graph, you can see that just 7,000 hours was spent on admin. So, collecting information, emails, all of that sort of thing. And then they also spent a lot of time, close to 4,000 hours on advocating for their groups and the work that they do, planning and managing the projects, and then really importantly, recording the information and the management. And together these tasks contribute to about 40% of the administrative tasks. And this graph or this information is very similar to the ones that we received for previous years. So overall, it's really important that the work that they do in organising, coordinating themselves is critical to efficient and effective on-ground work. So what do we know about the groups that do all this work on ground? Well, most of them are small, with a lot of them sort of having less than 50 members, and many in that 6 people through to 20 people range. What we did find that there was a small number of groups that participated in the survey that have over 100 members, and these groups interestingly work along the Swan and Canning rivers or other wetland areas. So in order to do their on-ground work, how much accessibility do they have to the tools and equipment that they need, and other aspects like this? So we found that most of the volunteer groups are very self-reliant, that they equip themselves either with through funding that they've received or providing their own equipment, their own transport for tools and that sort of thing. Some of the groups receive support from their local land managers. And probably an interesting observation was around animal rehab and it reflects the specialised nature of the work, but it's not something that most groups have access to the equipment or the skills and knowledge around this area. But overall, they have what they need to undertake the work that they do. So just very quickly, 55% of the groups were incorporated, which means they can apply for funding and have access to GST rebates, that sort of thing. But it also means that they have more requirement to have higher levels of governance and accountability. 90% of the groups had public liability insurance, and this was either covered by themselves, 39%, their local LGA, 32%, or through another organisation. So in terms of being good at managing or looking after their natural areas, what most of the groups reported was that they had an effective or extremely effective relationship with their managing body. So mostly the local government authority or the Department of Biodiversity Conservation and Attractions. And that the support that they received through these groups was to undertake on-ground work together with 87%, collaborating with groups in on-site surveys, that these organisations often provide funds for the environmental works or the tools and equipment for them. In some instances, they provide environmental management and training, and about half of them involve the groups in strategic planning. There's just a couple of images here of different groups that are working in our wetland areas and along the coast doing planting and weeding and that sort of thing. So in order to do the work that they do, how do they actually prioritise their NRM projects? It's sort of reflective of the fact that most of them said they have a positive relationship with the managing body. And so together, about half of the groups that responded determine it with the local government or with DBCA, or they use the biodiversity plans and the management plans. Some of the groups develop their own priorities, and we're not sure how this is done, but it might be based on their capacity to do the work, the funding that they've received, their personal interests. And so some of the things that they do together is collect information, and then they share that either with the local government, about 54% of them, with the state government, or other organisations. And the type of information that they collect is information on weed species, about 33% of that work that they do. They do native flora and fauna monitoring. Some groups are involved in monitoring pest animals, and others on the south coast is quite important to do dieback monitoring, and then the dreaded reporting of illegal dumping of rubbish. So one of the interesting things that we found is that although they collect a lot of information, they don't necessarily share it with the managing body. So how are they funded to carry out this work? So unfortunately, less than half of them feel like they have regular, reliable income. So their long-term capacity is potentially problematic. Some do get in-kind support or corporate sponsorship, but they rely mostly on grant funding, with 80% of them receiving grants in this area. Now, most of the grants are small and they of less than $5,000, and they come through the local government. But the West Australian government also provides significant funding through Coast Care, through the state NRM program, and in partnership with the Perth NRM and Alcoa Australia for the SALT program. Interestingly, yep, nearly
Sorry to
finished.
interrupt, Ingrid. We're running close to time.
Yep, no, nearly finished. And yeah, so the Australian government and state government funds are probably the largest grants of over $20,000. So just in closing, just wanted to reiterate the amount of work that the groups do, the hours that they put in. And what we're doing now is working with them to address some of these capacity gaps that have been identified, and to plan how we're going to use this information from the past, but through the new community capacity assessment as well, to develop plans and strategies for the future of natural resource management in the Perth region. Thanks, Andrew.
Oh, thanks, Ingrid, for that really interesting presentation. Oh, you've closed off there. That's great. We can segue into the question and answer part of the talk. I have a few questions from the audience, and one of them, the last one I got here was, have you found there is an ideal or critical size of groups, balance of roles within the group and funding model?
Oh, no. But that's something that we might look at with this new survey that we do. But I suppose what we have found is that the groups that find it easiest to engage with the broader community and to get additional volunteers or always have people on board are the ones that are slightly larger. So probably, more than 20 people. And also those that work in areas where people feel that they have a strong connection to it. So I think that reflects why there's some of the larger groups are on the Swan and Canning rivers, because that's something that most people, or some of the coastal groups, most people have a connection that goes beyond the area that they live in.
Thank you, Ingrid. One other question. We're looking at stats again. Were there any questions about ethnicity or socio-economic background?
No, so we haven't captured that information. From our personal experience with most of these groups, we find that many of them are retired people who come from sort of a professional background. There are, through the student volunteering, we have a lot of international students that participate in that. And there are some particular church groups or community sections of the community. So in some of our southern suburbs, there's quite strong family groups or ethnic groups that participate and have participated on a regular basis for some of the coastal cleanups and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great, Ingrid. Well, thank you very much for coming and sharing about all that really interesting statistics on natural resource management over there in Perth. So thanks a lot, Ingrid.
That's okay. Thanks. See you later, Andrew.
We're now going to go for lunch. We'll be about 45 minutes. Please click on to your session of choice when you return.